A convicted child murderer is back making headlines. Jake Eakin, child killer, now turned full-time anti-abortion protester.
It was a brutal case that shocked the small town of Ephrata and made history at the state level because at the time the murderers were just kids themselves.
Evan Savoy and Jake Eakin were both found guilty in the death of Craig Sorger. We did reach out to Sorger's family for this story tonight. They did not get back to us, but I did sit down with Jake Eakin. It is his first on-camera interview in almost 15 years. He tells me it's because of his violent past that he's now working to save lives.
Chuck Sorger wants justice for his son's death.
They were surprised by how graphic the details.
Claim of murder in the first degree is charged.
At the tender age of 12, Jake Eakin went from a small-town boy in eastern Washington to accused murderer.
911 emergency.
Yes, I have a missing child.
It was February 2003. 13-year-old Craig Sorger was viciously beaten and stabbed to death in a wooded area near his home in Ephrata.
Ephrata ambulance, Ephrata Fire Department, respond to Oasis Park, southwest of the ponds.
His mom says two boys came to her door, Evan Savoy and Jake Eakin. They were asking if Craig, who was considered mildly autistic, could come out and play.
I don't trust who he is with, is my problem.
It was the last time she saw her son alive.
How long's he been missing?
About 3 hours.
Craig's body was found that night covered in leaves and dozens of stab wounds.
Right at this point in PD, they're going to treat it as a homicide.
This is the tree they said they were climbing.
Court records show police immediately suspected Savoy and Eakin. And despite their initial claims that Craig fell out of a tree, both boys were charged as adults with first-degree murder, making Jake the youngest in Washington history to face those charges as an adult.
Mr. Eakin, to the charge of murder in the first degree, how do you plead?
But in 2006, Eakin abruptly reversed course. He accepted a plea deal on second-degree murder by complicity.
You solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth under penalty of perjury.
In court, he testified that Savoy had been the ringleader, first attacking Craig with a large rock, then beating him with tree branches and stabbing him dozens of times with a knife.
You say you want to go to Kingsbury?
Jake was eventually sentenced to 14 years in prison and Savoy 26 years.
Craig got justice today, didn't he?
At that time, Jake tells me he was filled with anger. You were 12 years old. You basically grew up in prison.
I spent a great deal of time in lockup, in solitary confinement because of trouble that I got into. And there was a block of time where I spent 14 months in there, and then I got out and then I went back into there and served another 9 months. So that's a good, like 2.5 years that I spent pretty much by myself. And it was during that time that I kind of like started to educate myself.
Jake says he became an avid reader, devouring works about the Nazi Holocaust, slavery, and the Bible.
When the Lord saved me, I was in a county jail.
After escaping from work release and being rearrested in South Dakota, Jake was then sent to the Yakima County Jail, where he says he found God.
It was like a radical transformation.
But even with his newfound faith, Jake floundered a bit when he was released from jail in 2017. That all changed, though, he says, while watching an abortion protest video on YouTube.
We are not criminals here. We're here to save lives.
Something happened in that moment where like a switch went off, and the Lord kind of opened my eyes to the preborn and abortion.
Jesus Christ loves these children inside this place.
Since then, Jake has called himself an abolitionist, staging Planned Parenthood protests and anti-LGBTQ demonstrations across the region.
We go to college campuses and we engage with the students.
We do not feel safe with him here.
Instead of shrinking away from the public eye, as many ex-prisoners often do, Jake now seems to welcome the spotlight. Some say a bit too much.
He wants attention.
Like Paul Dillon of Planned Parenthood in Spokane.
That's his goal, and that means is just a way to bring more attention to himself.
What does it mean for your clients who are trying to walk through the doors of Planned Parenthood and are met with that type of protest?
Yeah. No patient should ever come through our doors and have to face that kind of harassment, intimidation.
So why use such abrasive tactics to get attention?
Well, think of it this way. So if we had a Holocaust of 2-year-olds instead of preborn children, our response would be radically different, right? And so the reason that I'm an abolitionist is I believe in being consistent, meaning I believe there's children being murdered down the street from where I live.
What about the people who call you the worst kind of hypocrite?
Because of my past?
Mm-hmm.
So this is where the beautiful thing is for me, is that we serve a God that can forgive murderers.
And I served 14 years in prison for this murder.
And I am a murderer, been redeemed through Christ.
And Jesus Christ had value.
That same grace is being offered to all these mothers and fathers that are taking their children to Planned Parenthood. And that's why I'm out there.
What do you say when you hear him say, "It's just because I'm trying to save children"? So Planned Parenthood has often been the chosen site for Jake Eakin's protests, but he has also been seen at pride festivals and gay clubs as well, which has some people questioning if his message is really about saving children. That is coming up in part 2 of our story, coming up next.
And the last person you want to be coming out and saving your soul, he needs to concentrate on his own soul.
When Jake Eakin first went to jail, he was only 12 years old. He was convicted of helping to kill 13-year-old Craig Sorger in a park near his home in Ephrata.
Today, Jake is an outspoken anti-abortion protester, often using aggressive tactics, including bloody posters and loud bullhorns. And many say that is what takes away from his message. Here now is part 2 of our story.
And I served 14 years in prison for this murder.
That I am a murderer, been redeemed through Christ.
What do you say when you hear him say, "It's just because I'm trying to save children"? What does that mean to you?
I think he's a con artist. I think that he wants money. This is his job, and he will say whatever he can to try and have people believe in him.
Because if you're down there trying to stop abortion, then why are we having hate signs and hate things screamed at the LGBT community?
Longtime Spokane drag queen Savannah So Real has had multiple run-ins with Jake Eakin.
He's not really interested in actually turning people to Jesus and to help them get on a path of righteousness and save their souls. What he's doing is trying to shock the community.
These folks are lost without Jesus Christ.
And Jake says he does consider his abolitionist ministry his full-time job, sometimes getting paid to do graphics and videos for various organizations. He tells me he financially supports his family mostly through donations.
And we're here to call you to wake up.
So what does Craig Sorger's family think, the parents of the young boy Jake helped kill? Again, we reached out to Chuck and Lisa Sorger multiple times for this story, but did not hear back. After the murder trial, though, they told us their sense of loss will never be fully healed.
He was my lovey boy. I talk to him every day, tell him I love him still, and that I miss him.
Have you ever reached out to them?
I'm not allowed to. So I would love to. I would actually love to have the opportunity to sit down with them.
What would you say to them?
I would love the opportunity to express, to seek their forgiveness for what happened.
How often do you think about what you did?
There's probably not a day that goes by that I don't look back at that. For me, it gives me a greater value of all life. I know how valuable it is. I've seen how fragile it is.
You just touched on what it gave you, the perspective that it's given you. But what about what you took from a family?
Yeah, I think about that every day.
But for some, Eakin's past crime is simply unforgivable, while others believe his past is what makes his message today even more powerful.
Being a preacher of the gospel, our very faith says that Christ changes people.
Thank you all for being here tonight.
Pastor Ken Peters heads up Covenant Church in North Spokane and often opens his doors to Jake Eakin and his abolitionist ministry. It's where the church at Planned Parenthood was born.
We all have pasts. Some have pasts worse than others. And you know, when somebody finds the Lord forgives them. We forgive him and we embrace him.
Do people question you for that decision?
A lot of people do. I take a lot of criticism for Jake being my friend and for me being accommodating to him and welcoming him.
Still, Pastor Ken makes it clear he doesn't always agree with Jake's tactics.
I have the right to come here and express my beliefs.
The bloody photos and the loud bullhorn.
He is very aggressive. He's more aggressive than me. Even though I don't do things the way he does, I understand where he comes from, and I believe that deep down, Jake is a good man.
And other churches seem to believe the same. Jake is now getting ready to move his family to Idaho, where he tells me they will travel the country as evangelists. All the while, he says, never forgetting where it all started.
Craig Sorger was a beautiful young boy.
What do you think about when you think about him? You said you think about him every day.
Yeah, it's tragic because you can't help but think, you know, as I go through life and I become a father and I become a husband and those things, and to think about this young boy, this child that will never get to experience those things. And the reality of that hits me all the time. And tragically, there's nothing I can do to take that one back. It's still there, deeply embedded, and it'll be there probably the rest of my life, of having to look back at that day that Craig was murdered and the regret of that and living with that.
You say it in a passive way. The day that Craig was murdered. Do you take responsibility? Do you take ownership?
I do. But I don't want people to feel like I'm trying to justify anything. I take full ownership of what happened that day. And if I could go back to that day, I would speak up for Craig Sorger in the same way I would speak up for these preborn children.
We did reach out to Craig's parents for their side of this story. We did not hear back, and we are respecting their privacy. At this point, we know some of you may be wondering, why did we do this story in the first place? Why give this convicted killer more of a voice? And the answer to that is simply because we wanted to know why he's doing what he's doing and how it impacts others here in our community. And the truth is, his history is unlike any other. So, is he sincere? It's up to you to decide.
Certainly a polarizing figure.
Indeed.
Thank you, Whitney.